Hello everyone, this is Eric, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is my review of Creepy, a Japanese thriller from 2016 that was directed by Kiyoshi Kurosawa. Now, after recovering from a tragic event, a former detective, now professor, receives a request from his ex-colleague to examine a missing family case that occurred 6 years earlier. The daughter, who was on a school trip, did not go missing, so the investigation focuses somewhat on the questioning of this girl as the starting point for reopening the cold case. Now, the professor finds himself intrigued with the circumstances surrounding the case and eventually becomes obsessed with it. Meanwhile, his new neighbor is acting strangely towards his family. Now, this is a deliberately paced, slow-burn thriller that has some of this director's characteristics and stylistic hallmarks. If you're familiar with Kiyoshi's prior films like Pulse or Cure, you will know that he likes to showcase plenty of wide camera shots and exchanges of dialogue with minimal editing. And that's what you get here. He also has an odd fascination with plastic sheeting, which also makes a few appearances. I really like his directing style, so that's a plus for me here. Performances are solid all around. Special mention goes to Teruyuki Kagawa, who is quite talented at portraying a character with an edge. That definitely comes through here. He's quietly menacing and frequently taunts his victims in a very laid-back, controlled manner, which makes him very dislikable. The fact that he is hard to catch and prosecute, given his methods, also creates an effective conflict. Now, given the title, you might expect a few creepy moments, and you do get some. I especially like the final state of the victims, which is not something that you see very often in films. It was something a little bit different of how the victims kind of end up. Also, this director's overall style and sound design lends to creating tension beneath the surface. Now, the major problem that I had with this movie is the same problem that most people have with it, based on what I've read online. The inexplicable decision-making that is made by the antagonist's victims, who intentionally avoid escape or reporting him to the police, despite having the opportunity at times. Now, the methods in which the villain coerces his victims is implied, but never really showcased in its entirety. It seems to be an entirely natural process, like lacking in any supernatural influence, but it isn't fleshed out enough to make it truly convincing. This film never really explains how he tempts his victims and can seemingly control them at times. Consequently, the victim logic does not make much sense in this. It's unrelatable and demands a serious suspension of disbelief on the part of the viewer. But as a counterexample, I'd like to take the aforementioned film Cure. We are actually shown multiple times how the murderer in that film uses hypnosis to take control of his victims. And those are some of the best moments in that movie. They made the villain extremely convincing in his actions, despite the fact that they had some supernatural influence to them. Now, don't misunderstand me here, because I do love ambiguity in films. I don't need things explained to me to enjoy a flick. Heck, I don't even need a film to make sense in order to enjoy it. But Creepy implies a purely natural mechanism for this bad guy's deeds, and that demands a fairly convincing explanation for his abilities, and it doesn't really give you that. Creepy has, it really had two options to fix this problem. First, introduce a scene or two that showed the progression of the bad guy's influence on his victims, or, number two, rewrite the victim's actions to be more believable. This film really did neither of those, and I consider that a flaw. There's also a pretty big contrivance, or a coincidence, that emerges throughout the film that I'm not sure if it really is a contrivance or if it was progressed naturally. I'll probably have to watch the film again, but it seemed like a pretty big coincidence that occurs at one point. But with that said, I still enjoyed this movie. For a runtime of over 2 full hours, this moves fairly well. I never got bored while watching it. That's got to say something. The mystery and investigation elements were certainly strong enough to hold my attention, as well as the other positives that I mentioned earlier. After watching this a second time recently, I am considering a purchase for my DVD collection, so I did enjoy it enough for that. This is not one of Kiyoshi Kurosawa's best films, in my opinion, but it's still good enough and has a rewatchability factor to it. It's certainly better than the director's last two films, Reel and Journey to the Shore, so there is some hope that he will give us another great film that will match some of his prior classics. So yes, I do recommend Creepy, which is widely available on DVD and Amazon streaming. And as always, we'll see you next time.